Hi everyone, my name is Shreya Anaretti, and I'm a first year biochemistry major from Charlotte, North Carolina.
My name is Anaya Dawkins, and I'm a first year biochemistry major from Columbia, South Carolina.
Hi everyone, my name is Kayla Vance. I'm a graduating senior psychology pre-med major, leadership studies minor from Atlanta, Georgia. And today our group will be discussing the influence of diet on the migratory patterns of birds of prey during the fall season in Smith Point, Texas. So as an introduction, birds of prey are predatory bird species that play a huge role in ecosystems and they depend on migration for survival. So examples of these birds include bald eagles, Cooper's hawk, turkey vultures, think species like that. And the term migration is known as the synchronized seasonal relocation of those populations, specifically between their breeding grounds and the wintering areas. So these migratory patterns are determined by a series of appearances near various hawk watch sites, and migrated areas have more favorable weather conditions and resources available. So there are numerous studies that study the fact that study the influences of migratory patterns of birds of prey. The Journal of Ornithology reported that competition for food due to resource scarcity at stopover sites overall impacted population levels and the time of departure for continuing migrators. This demonstrates that food and resource availability are crucial factors that evaluate migration patterns for birds of prey. It has also been established that through previous research, the changes of these migration counts are more of a result of migration changes rather than population changes during their departure times. So, like I said, there's numerous research studies conducted on the factors of influence. However, there's limited research on the influence that diet specifically has on these patterns. So, taking an approach based on identifying their feeding habits for the birds of prey, such as being insectivore or omnivore, can be useful to assess if the diet of the bird may influence when they will migrate during the fall season. So because of this, our research question is, how does diet influence which birds of prey are more likely to migrate towards the beginning of the fall compared to later in the fall? So our group hypothesized that the feeding motifs influence when birds of prey will migrate. And specifically, we predict that insectivores will migrate earlier because insects go away earlier in the season. Next, birds that choose to eat amphibians, reptiles, and rodents will go away second. And then lastly, the scavengers will migrate last because there's always decaying biomass to feed on in the environment. So next is our methods section. For our methods, our site was located in Smith Point, Texas. This site is mostly a coastal marsh with oak moats and fallow fields. And the observers at this site work on top of a 7-meter tower with the goal of monitoring population trends. So at Smith Point, Texas, a group of observers and the official counter went out every day of the fall season, starting from August 15th to November 30th. And their observation time usually started at 6 in the morning and ended at 1500. In that period, the observers would count and identify the different migratory birds that they observed, and they recorded the weather forecasts, visitors, different things like that. And they repeated this step every day of the fall season that they would go and observe at that specific site. So again, our research question is, how does diet influence which birds of prey species are more likely to migrate in the beginning of fall compared to the end of the fall? So to collect this necessary data to answer the research question, and if it fails or supports our hypothesis, we use watchcount.org to observe the migratory patterns of the birds of prey species at the Smith Point, Texas site. We looked at the daily counts of all 4 months, August through November, and put them in a separate Excel sheet to create the graphs and the tables and then analyze the data. Those figures were created from a visual representation to identify which species migrated more towards the beginning compared to the later months, and thus helping us see if the feeding motifs does or does not have an influence on the migratory patterns of the birds of prey species. So next, we're going to talk about the results section. I'm going to segue to Anaya.
Okay, so for our results section, we use mainly these three graphs in the table beneath. We focused on more of the data for throughout the fall season because we were trying to determine what actually the feeding motifs, if that determine when they wanted to migrate. So for figure 1, we see that the brown color is dominating throughout the whole entire fall season, which that's represented by the broad-winged hawk, which is a herpetivore, which eats amphibians and reptiles, and a rodentivore. And then we also have the Swainson's hawk, which is a rodentivore and insectivore. And the short-tailed hawk, which is the ovivore, which eats other birds. And those have the daily abundance, the highest daily abundance in early fall months. So towards the later fall months, still in figure 1, the broad-winged hawk, Swainson's hawk, and the turkey vulture had the highest daily abundance in the later fall months. Only difference is that the turkey vultures are scavengers. So also with the Cooper's hawk, which is an ovivore, had the highest frequency of occurrence, which is represented in figure 2. And the sharp-shinned hawk, which is another ovivore, had the highest frequency of occurrence in September and October, looking at figure 3. And the red-tailed hawk, which is an ophiovore and a rodentivore, had the highest frequency occurrence in the month of November. And the broad-winged hawk and the Swainson's hawk have the highest abundance in the early fall months, which is looking at the overall highly abundance. The turkey vultures and the sharp-shinned hawks have the highest abundance in the later fall months.
So based on the results, it can be concluded that our hypothesis was failed to be supported. The herpetivores, rodentivores, and insectivores had the highest daily abundance during the earlier and later fall months, such as the broad-winged hawk, which is a herpetivore and a rodentivore, and the Swainson's hawk, which is a rodentivore and an insectivore. And it was also seen that the ovivores, which include Cooper's hawk and the sharp-shinned hawk, peaked during majority of the fall months, not necessarily earlier or later in the season. So these results also rejected 2 of our predictions because insectivores, herpetivores, and rodentivores migrated all throughout the fall season, not necessarily insectivores migrating the earliest, and then the herpetivores and the rodentivores. One of our predictions was supported by the data, which is the scavengers, which were the turkey vultures, and they were shown to have the highest daily abundance and overall highest abundance during the later fall months. However, that's not sufficient enough to support our hypothesis that feeding motif influences when birds of prey will migrate during the fall season. So as discussed previously, existing studies published in the Journal of Ornithology and Journal of Raptor Research have established that resource and food availability are crucial factors in determining the migratory patterns of birds of prey. However, there is limited research on the influence of diet on migratory patterns. So through this study, we've aimed to try to fill that gap in research, but because we were unable to support our hypothesis due to no particular pattern or trend exerted by the birds of prey species, there are numerous future directions for this research. So one approach would be to apply a statistical analysis over the course of a few years, so about 5 or 10 years, to analyze if there's any trends being noticed from a longitudinal standpoint. A different approach could be to test the same hypothesis in multiple different sites to evaluate whether there are any noticeable trends in those areas. And if there are, an analysis of what factors, such as weather, human population, or environment, could be contributing to those trends can be conducted. And another approach could be to test a different hypothesis. For example, examining other factors such as the size of the bird or weather that could influence the birds of prey species preferences of migrating earlier or later in the fall. So overall, this research sets a ground base for various new approaches for a similar inquiry. We would like to thank the National Science Foundation for supporting this project, and we would also like to thank Dean Tolliver, Dr. Dash, Dr. Ahedor, and Hampton University Department of Biological Sciences. Thank you.